Um, Imagine you are walking into an ancient, dimly lit room. And right in the center of this room sits an invisible throne. It's a seat of unimaginable power that exists just behind the curtain of our everyday reality. Now think about who actually gets to sit there. I mean, we usually assume it's the loudest,
Yeah.
right? Or the strongest or the most ambitious person in the room.
Yeah.
But what if there is an underlying architecture to power, like a literal cosmic blueprint that dictates not just who rises to ultimate authority, but exactly how and when and why they will inevitably fall from it? It's this seat that guarantees both your coronation and eventually a really brutal karmic customs check.
Ah, yes. It is the ultimate double-edged sword of human destiny. Because, you see, to sit on this invisible throne means you are never truly sitting alone. You are sharing it with the weight, the expectations, and the unresolved debts of everyone who came before you. The moment you take that seat, you inherit the kingdom, yes, but you also inherit the ghosts.
Which brings us to the exact mission of our deep dive today. I've been poring over a stack of incredibly intricate astrological source materials, and they are specifically centered around a classical Indian text known as the Karam Vipak Samhita. And our goal for you today is to decode a very specific, highly potent piece of cosmic real estate. We are talking about the Magha Nakshatra. It's known as the royal star of kings, of ancestors, and of legacy. We are going to unpack the profound psychological mechanics of this star. And then we are going to look at how this exact blueprint has visibly shaped the destinies of some of the most prominent world figures in modern history.
And the foundational material here is absolutely fascinating, primarily because the Karam Vipak Samhita is not your standard almanac or predictive textbook. No, it is framed as a sprawling cosmic conversation between Lord Shiva, the Lord of Time and Destruction, and Ma Parvati. So right from the start, we are dealing with a framework that is fundamentally concerned with the deepest layers of cause and effect. It explores the consequences of past actions, the lingering debts we carry across lifetimes, and the specific synchronizations required to clear them. It is, essentially, an operational manual for finishing pending karma.
I love how the source notes actually frame the approach to this material too. Like, it explicitly states that understanding this isn't about just memorizing degrees or planetary names. You have to read what is not written and hear what hasn't been said. You have to look at the invisible forces driving human behavior. It blends this deeply esoteric mysticism with what we will soon see are startlingly precise historical patterns. But to make sure we are all on the same page, we need to establish exactly what and where Magha actually is. Looking at the astronomical data here, in lunar zodiac, Magha spans a very precise slice of the sky from 0 degrees to 13 degrees in 20 minutes, sitting right at the very beginning of the sign of Leo.
And that placement is the first major key to unlocking its mechanics. It occupies the very front porch of Leo. In astrological terms, Leo is the domain of the sun. It represents the king, the center of the solar system, the vital life force, and the ego. So anyone with prominent planetary placements in this specific 13-degree window has a guideline character that is inherently leonine. They possess a natural, regal quality. They are reflective, highly intuitive, and often command attention without even trying.
But wait, hold on, Guruji, because the research makes a very specific distinction here that completely threw me off. It says that true Magha energy is notably non-egocentric in its core expression. That feels like a massive contradiction to me. If you're placed at the very beginning of Leo, the sign of the sun and the king, wouldn't that produce a massive overinflated ego? Why does this specific star strip the ego away?
It is a brilliant paradox, and it all comes down to ownership. If we look at the underlying architecture of this constellation, the Throne of Magha does not actually belong to the individual sitting on it. It belongs to the Petrus.
The Petrus. Okay, we need to define that clearly for anyone who might be unfamiliar. We are talking about the deified ancestors, correct?
Precisely. The ancestors who have passed on but whose energetic legacy remains. Magha is literally the throne of the ancestors. So the karmic task of a person carrying heavy Magha energy is not to build a giant monument to themselves. Their job is to act as a custodian. They are a living bridge tasked with upholding the legacy of the past and passing down a rich, stable tradition to the next generation through duty, conscious ritual, and the preservation of order. When you deeply internalize that you are merely a temporary custodian of a much older throne, the personal ego is forced to step aside.
Oh, wow. So you are just keeping the seat warm. You are managing the estate for the people who built it and holding it in trust for the people who will inherit it later.
That is the exact psychological pressure of Magha. And because the word Magha etymologically stands for magic or magus, along with master, magnificent, and mighty, these individuals are naturally drawn to the hidden mechanics of the universe. They have a visceral connection to the past, making them profoundly introspective. They often gravitate toward history, psychology, genealogy, or even occult sciences.
Right.
But the text provides a severe warning about this trait. Because their psychological engagement with the past and their responsibility to the future is so dominant, they can completely lose track of the present moment. If they fail to remain rigorously attentive to the now, those ancestral patterns, the traumas, the failures, the corruptions of the past will just repeat themselves unchecked.
Think about that in your own life for a second. If you're constantly looking backward over your shoulder at your grandfather's expectations, while simultaneously looking far ahead at what you are leaving for your grandchildren, you are almost guaranteed to trip over the rocks sitting right in front of your feet. You become completely paralyzed by legacy.
It is a profound vulnerability. Mechanically speaking, the core vibrational frequency of Magha is fundamentally conservative and authoritative. It deeply respects hierarchy, structure, and institutional power. Because of this, certain planets absolutely thrive in this environment, while others are completely crushed by it.
Let's break that down because the notes specifically highlight the Sun, Mars, and Jupiter as the planets that do exceptionally well here. Why those three?
Well, let's look at the mechanisms of those three. The Sun is the natural king. It understands central authority. Mars is the commander of the army. It understands discipline, protection, and chain of command. Jupiter is the wise counselor or the high priest. It understands the value of tradition, law, and empowering a valid higher power. When you place these planets in the conservative throne room of Magha, they synchronize perfectly. They create a daunting, almost unchallengeable presence. If you have these alignments, you are naturally favored for roles that require ruling, managing, governing, or enforcing institutional structures. You simply understand the assignment.
Assuming, of course, that those planets are well placed in the overall chart. But what about the planets that are inherently anti-hierarchical, the planets that prioritize feelings over rules? I mean, what happens to them?
That is where we see immense psychological friction. Magha is not an ideal placement for planetary energies that require deep, fluid empathy, constant compromise, or extreme emotional sensitivity.
So we're looking at the Moon, Venus, and Mercury here.
Yes, the sensitive, diplomatic, and communicative planets. When you force a soft, compassionate planet to wear a heavy iron crown, it struggles immensely. It can produce issues with empathy, leading to a rigid stubbornness. Or, conversely, it can create a leader who is terrified of open combat and over-relies on heavy-handed bureaucratic authority just to avoid direct confrontation.
Wow. And then the research points to the absolute rebels, the planets that fundamentally want to dismantle the throne entirely: Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu.
When these anti-authoritarian forces enter Magha, it triggers a massive karmic battleground between tradition and reform. Saturn is the planet of delay and harsh reality. It will demand that the power of the throne is earned through agonizing time and excruciating duty, stripping away all the glamour. Rahu is the planet of obsessive, insatiable desire. It will try to seize the throne obsessively, often using unorthodox or disruptive means. And Ketu, which is actually the planetary lord of Magha itself, is the force of ultimate spiritual detachment. It will constantly try to force the native to abandon the throne completely.
We're definitely going to look at the exact charts of some major historical figures later to see this play out in reality. It is wild how accurately those planetary descriptions map onto real people. But before we get to the people, there are two distinct concepts from the Nakshatra mentioned in our sources that explain the actual day-to-day strategy of how Magha operates. Like, how does it actually wield its power? The first concept is a Sanskrit word, apabramsa. Can you explain that?
Apabramsa. The most direct translation is suppressing ruination.
Suppressing ruination. The research explains that this is the ideal objective of conservative power. The goal of the throne is to prevent something valuable, excellent, or profoundly useful from being destroyed by the passage of time or by chaotic forces. But there is a massive caveat here that I think applies to so much of modern politics. The text says it is a grave misuse of Magha power to conserve or protect things that are corrupt, rotting, or no longer serve their purpose.
It forces us to define what true conservatism actually is in a philosophical sense. True Magha energy is not about hoarding the past blindly just because it is old. It is about the rigorous discernment of value. If you are tasked with protecting an ancient castle and the eastern wall is filled with black mold and rotting wood, you do not protect the rot in the name of tradition. You tear out the rot, you burn the infected wood, and you rebuild the wall to save the castle. Suppressing ruination often requires destroying the corrupted elements of your own legacy.
That is such a vivid way to look at it. And it leads perfectly into the second concept, which is Rudanta. The research defines Rudanta as the power of condemnation. And I found this fascinating because the primary weapon of this royal star isn't a physical sword, and it isn't an army. It is the ability to criticize, deplore, and condemn a deviation from a valuable principle. Magha dissuades the majority from breaking the rules simply by pointing out the deviation with absolute, unshakable authority.
It is the ultimate strategy of winning without fighting. You demoralize your opponents and maintain order simply by displaying the absolute authority invested in you by a superior power, in this case, the ancestors.
You know, the analogy that immediately came to mind when I was reading this section of the source material is a bouncer at a hyper-exclusive, high-end nightclub. Think about the absolute best bouncers in the world.
Right.
They are usually huge, yes, but they almost never actually throw a punch. You just don't need to. Their mere physical posture, their unblinking eye contact, and the implicit heavy knowledge that they have the entire backing of the establishment behind them, the club owners, the security cameras, the police, the law is enough to deter a fight before a single punch is thrown. They just look at the drunk guy causing a scene, and the guy suddenly decides it's a great time to just walk away.
That is a brilliant encapsulation of the energy. The sheer density of the confidence deters the contestation. The foundational text gives several historical examples of this derived authority. A younger sibling defeating an older, stronger sibling in an argument simply by aligning themselves with the parents' rules. A single police officer deterring a crowd of criminals just by tapping the badge on their chest. Ancient kings claiming the divine right to rule from God. It is all the power of the badge. You are not fighting with your own personal strength. You are invoking the massive, invisible weight of the establishment.
And the sources include a traditional supplication to the Pitris that highlights how this weight is meant to be used for good. It says, the Pitri come with Magha. They cause the mind's desires to be good like their own. If we invite them, they will come and strengthen our endeavors by self-discipline. It even mentions this poetic idea that fire burns but does not burn the ancestors because they exist in a purified realm. They are there to help the native perform their deeds justly.
It serves as a constant spiritual reminder that this derived power is not a blank check for tyranny. When the core traits of a Magha native are aligned properly with this discipline, the results are magnificent. You see individuals with a fiercely strong identity, deep courageousness, and a unique humility mixed with controlled aggression. They're entirely driven by duty. They're also highly creative and incredibly generous to those in need. They love to host massive gatherings, entertain, and share resources. They often adopt a very fatherly or motherly persona, deeply invested in raising children or mentees to carry on the legacy.
Right, they want the luxurious kingdom, sure, but they want to earn the respect and faith of their people without letting the power corrupt their core. But, as with everything astrology, the expression of this energy is not a monolith, is it? To really understand how this regal power manifests differently from person to person, we have to look at exactly which room of the throne room they are sitting in. The architectural blueprint breaks Magha down into 4 distinct divisions called Navamsapadas. Let's walk through the mechanics of these 4 rooms because the flavor of the king changes dramatically depending on which room is activated.
The mathematics of this are quite elegant. The 13-degree and 20-minute span of the constellation is divided into 4 equal parts, or padas. Each part is ruled by a different underlying zodiac sign and planetary energy, adding a specific subfrequency to the overall Magha vibration. Let us examine Pada 1. This division spans from exactly 0 degrees to 3 degrees and 20 minutes of Leo. It is structurally ruled by Aries and its planetary lord, Mars.
So we are taking the baseline energy of the Leo Sun, the king, and we are injecting it with the Aries Mars energy. The warrior, the pioneer, the impulse. That sounds incredibly intense.
It is arguably the most aggressive and potent manifestation of Magha. It is ambitious to a fault, highly energetic, fiercely competitive, and incredibly willful. These are the natural soldiers of the zodiac. They are the frontline fighters who are fiercely, almost violently protective of their authority and their heritage. They are continuously pushing the limits, perfectly willing to do whatever it takes to remain at the top of the hierarchy. They demand respect, they are highly assertive, and they can absolutely be feared by their enemies.
The research notes that they're highly passionate, very physically active, and often have the potential for building large families or followings. But there is a clear vulnerability here, right? Because you have double fire Leo and Aries, they can be restless, impulsive, and prone to acting before they think, leading to questionable, heat-of-the-moment decision-making. It's like the warrior trying to sit still on the throne. Now, let's look at Peta 2. This spans from 3 degrees 20 minutes to 6 degrees 40 minutes, and it is ruled by Taurus and Venus.
This creates a completely different psychological profile. Venus is the planet of luxury, diplomacy, aesthetics, and compromise. When you introduce Venus into the throne room, it brings a much slower start. In fact, the ancient texts explicitly refer to natives with this placement as slow starters.
Let me push back on that for a second, Guruji. If Venus is the planet of beauty, charm, and getting what you want through attraction, why would that make someone a slow starter? Wouldn't they just charm their way to the top immediately? That feels counterintuitive.
It is a great question. You have to remember that Magha requires a strong, developed sense of self to handle the weight of the ancestors. Venus, by its very nature, seeks harmony and often yields to others just to keep the peace. So early in life, a Pada native might struggle with an underdeveloped ego. They might yield too much or prioritize comfort over duty. They have to learn how to integrate their desire for peace with the harsh requirements of leadership. But as they mature, this becomes their greatest asset. They attain diplomatic leadership. They learn to tone down the egotistical, roaring traits of Leo. They learn the high-level strategy of when to act, when to be aggressive, and when to smile, shake hands, and live to fight another day.
Oh, I see. So they attain their ultimate leadership and material wealth a bit later in life, once they figure out that balance. The notes mention they lead in very creative ways, always willing to offer help for the sake of fairness. They have a sweet, carefree speech pattern that wins over the masses with calmness. They absolutely still want the luxurious kingdom, but they are going to negotiate for it across a grand mahogany table, rather than fighting for it with a sword in the mud like Pada 1.
Exactly. The weapon changes from the sword to the contract. Then we move into Pada 3, spanning from 6 degrees 40 minutes to 10 degrees. This sector is ruled by Gemini and the planet Mercury. Here, the energy shifts away from the physical and the material and becomes incredibly mental.
Mercury is the planet of the nervous system, communication, commerce, and data. So when you inject that into the throne room, you get a leader who is mentally driven, highly cunning, deeply intelligent, and usually highly educated.
Yes, this is the realm of the order. They are socially driven, naturally gifted with languages, and are often prolific writers and voracious readers. They do not take the lead through physical dominance or quiet diplomacy. They take the lead through public speaking. They speak with immense pride, fierce determination, and rhetorical fire. They win the masses with words, concepts, and the rapid-fire exchange of ideas.
The blueprint highlights that they are natural businessmen, thriving in sales, marketing, and high-level advising. They also creatively express this royal energy through voice, acting, and the performing arts. These are the actors, the spokesmen, and the charismatic politicians of the throne room. And finally, we have Pada 4, 10 degrees to 13 degrees 20 minutes, ruled by the sign of Cancer and the moon.
Here the focus shifts entirely inward. The moon represents the mind, the emotions, the mother, and the home. This Pada is deeply emotional, fiercely motherly, and highly protective of its immediate people and its creative aspirations.
The research emphasizes that they are family-driven. They have immense pride in and loyalty to their loved ones. They care deeply about the seniors in their community, the older generations, and the physical land of their country itself.
What is truly fascinating about Pada 4 is the mechanism by which they achieve lordship. The texts state that they achieve power through giving oneself away. They are highly relatable, acutely sensitive to the emotional needs of others, and are beloved as leaders specifically because of their visible compassion. They are very often drawn to local leadership, city councils, state politics, community organizing, focusing intensely on ruling and protecting the homeland.
But every strength has a shadow, and there is a specific blind spot mentioned for Pada 4. Because their psychological focus is so intensely locked onto their own security, the well-being of their immediate family, or the safety of their local homeland, they can become somewhat selfish in their decision-making. They can be incredibly short-sighted when it comes to broader international or systemic affairs. They are hyper-focused on protecting their own nest, even if the rest of the forest is burning down.
A very precise and necessary distinction. Now, understanding the specific flavor of these 4 padas is crucial for chart analysis, but there is a hidden timing secret embedded in the mechanics of Magha that governs when all of this theoretical potential actually detonates into reality.
And this is the part of the deep dive that absolutely blew my mind. The texts state that around or shortly after the age of 21, the energy of Magha becomes prominently, undeniably activated in a person's life. And here is the kicker: this happens even if the person has absolutely no planets placed in Magha at all, as long as it is their ascendant or highly prominent in their chart structure. and is the classic Magha Nakshatra karmic activation age.
It acts as an energetic tripwire. Crossing that age threshold often triggers a massive structural life shift. It could manifest as a profound spiritual awakening, a sudden, highly honorable achievement, or a rapid, unexpected rise into a position of deep respect and legacy building.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here. If you are listening to this, think about what happens when you turn 21. I mean, in many modern cultures, 21 is literally the legal age of full adulthood. You graduate from university, you enter the workforce, you are legally permitted to do almost anything. So, is this astrological activation just the ancient world's way of describing a universal societal biological clock for maturity? Is the universe just saying, congratulations, you're a full adult now, time to get a job and act like it? Or is this something deeper? Is it specifically an ancestral alarm clock going off?
From the perspective of the Karam Vipak Samhita, it is absolutely the latter. It is not merely about reaching biological or societal maturity. The text defines this exact moment as the threshold where the ancestors formally hand over the keys to the throne. It is a highly specific karmic activation. The alarm clock rings, and the teachers essentially say, okay, your childhood is over. You have arrived at the gate. Here is the massive, crushing weight of our entire lineage. Carry it. However, the texts are clear that they only hand over this power if the native has proven they can sit on the throne with a modicum of humility. It is the profound, terrifying transition from being a protected child of the house to becoming the sole custodian of the house.
But the ancestors don't just hand over the power and the wealth, right? They hand over the intense psychological pressure of holding it. And when that pressure becomes too much, when the human mind cracks under the weight of the ancestors, it brings out the shadow side of the star. Because every throne casts a long, dark shadow.
And the shadow of Magha is formidable. It is the shadow of the tyrant. When the ego takes hold, refusing to be just a custodian, or when the nakshatra is heavily afflicted by difficult planets, we see the manifestation of a dark, unyielding obsession with power and position. The native can become deeply elitist, holding an arrogant, dismissive attitude toward those below them in the hierarchy. It can breed intense prejudice, xenophobia, or a dangerous sense of racial or bloodline superiority.
The research lists out these shadow traits, so clearly materialist, merciless, and cruel towards others. It notes that because their energy is so tied to the past, they can get violently stuck there. They have trouble moving forward, or they struggle to plan for an innovative future because they are so heavily anchored to what was. They want to drag the world backward. They can be incredibly spoiled, expecting power and resources to simply be handed to them by divine right. And they are notoriously susceptible to flattery, which the text note can lead to severe lapses in judgment, including sexual infidelity or corruption.
This brings us to a crucial astrological mechanism called the unstable chair. This occurs when the foundation of the throne itself is cracked. For instance, if the planetary lord of the 6th house, which governs enemies, debts, and obstacles, or the 8th house, which governs sudden transformations, scandals, and hidden destruction, casts a strong aspect onto Magha. Or, in a very specific scenario, if Ketu conjuncts the sun in this space. In these structural scenarios, the native suffers from a constant, gnawing, deeply paranoid phobia of losing their authority.
They are sitting on the throne, but they are terrified someone is creeping up behind them to pull the chair out from under them.
Exactly. And what does that constant low-level terror breed? It breeds endless, exhausting political maneuvering. It breeds paranoia. It creates a complete obsession with maintaining status at all costs, which, ironically, is exactly what ultimately leads to their sudden reputational ruin or literal physical issues with their seat of power.
It is like a high-stakes, terrifying game of musical chairs.
Yeah.
But the source material issues an incredibly severe warning here. It isn't just a possibility, it states it as an absolute karmic guarantee. The text states that any malefic planet placed in Magha, or having Magha as the ascendant itself, indicates that the native will face a major downfall, a public disgrace, or a severe fall from a high position at least once in their life. The music is guaranteed to stop, and you will fall.
It is presented as a mathematical karmic certainty in these charts. The only variable is which specific part of your life acts as the tripwire, and the text provides the formula for figuring that out. The cause of the downfall is almost always intrinsically tied to the specific house significations of the planet sitting in Magha, or the houses that planet rules in the chart.
Let's translate that mechanism. So, if the planet ruling your 5th house, which is the house of children, speculative investments, and creative projects, is sitting in Magha, your public downfall will likely be triggered by a scandal involving your children, a massive investment failure, or a creative project that bombs spectacularly. If it is the 9th lord, The downfall might be tied to a crisis involving a father figure, a guru, or a religious scandal. If it's tied to the 12th house, the fall comes from hidden enemies, isolation, or secret bed pleasures. But the real question is why? Why is this downfall a baked-in requirement? Is the universe just operating as a cruel trickster god, building these leaders up just to enjoy tearing them down?
It is not cruelty. It is an absolute necessary correction. If we look purely at the spiritual mechanics laid out in the Karam Vipak Samhita, this downfall is the ultimate karmic customs check. Magha sits at a critical evolutionary juncture in the zodiac. The downfall is specifically designed to strip the native of their inflated ego. The universe forcefully, often painfully, removes the false attachments to the material symbols of power to remind the native of their true purpose. They're supposed to serve the collective, not enrich themselves. It is a forced, non-negotiable detachment.
It is the brutal stripping of the ego. Now, to see this theoretical game of musical chairs in action, our source materials have provided the specific astrological charts of some of the most famous modern political leaders. And I want to pause here and remind everyone listening as we go through these charts, we're looking purely at the astrological mechanics, the cosmic math, laid out in the research. We are impartially mapping the text's analysis onto these historical lives to see how these planetary placements manifest in reality. We are analyzing the blueprint, nothing more.
Let us begin by examining the chart provided for Barack Obama. The text highlights a very specific, potent placement. He has Rahu located at precisely 4 degrees and 34 minutes in Leo. This places it directly in Magha 2, situated within his 8th house.
Okay, let's unpack those layers.
Yeah.
Rahu and Magha 2. We discussed Pada 2 earlier. That is the Venus-ruled diplomatic division. The slow starter who eventually wins the masses with calm, carefully measured speech and a desire for harmony. And Rahu is the shadow planet of massive, insatiable desire, obsession, and the breaking of traditional boundaries.
Yes. When you place Rahu in Magha, it creates a massive, almost gravity-defying psychological pull toward recognition, authority, and legacy. The text describes this specific combination as a destined rise, one that is fueled by an ancestral or karmic amplification. Rahu acts like an amplifier, blowing up the Magha desire to sit on the throne to epic proportions.
But the key here is that this entire combination is happening in his 8th house. Let's talk about the 8th house, because it is notoriously one of the most difficult and misunderstood houses in astrology. It is the house of sudden transformation, hidden forces, karmic debts, other people's money, and deep psychological excavation.
The 8th house is essentially a karmic pressure cooker. The text explains that the exact same intense, amplifying force of Rahu that elevates him to the presidency through this 8th house energy is also the force that exposes him. The 8th house demands that buried matters, complex family legacy themes, and hidden controversies be dragged out into the open light.
The research notes that his legacy was entirely shaped by these massive cycles of sharp, historic rise, followed by incredibly intense, polarized scrutiny. He went from a local community organizer to a global icon in a phenomenally short amount of time. That is the Rahu amplification. But his placement taught that true royalty in this era means serving the collective under a microscope, not just wearing the crown. And the text explicitly mentions that surviving the intense volatile scrutiny of an 8th house Magha placement requires a deep internal detachment from the throne itself. You have to be willing to let it go to survive the pressure.
Now let us contrast that elusive 8th house Rahu placement with the highly visible confrontational astrological profile provided for Donald Trump. According to the source data, his chart features a Leo ascendant, his rising sign, the core of his physical self and identity at roughly 6 degrees and 51 minutes. This places his very identity squarely in Magha Nakshatra Pada 3.
Pada 3, we just talked about this. That is the Gemini and Mercury-ruled division, the mentally driven, cunning energy. The division of fiery speech, winning massive crowds with rhetoric, the salesman, the natural businessman. I mean, that maps onto his biography almost too perfectly.
It is a profound synchronization. And further amplifying this, the text notes that he has Mars, the planet of war, aggression, and military-like drive, placed closely by, residing in Magha 2, entirely within his 1st house.
So you have Mars, the ultimate cosmic warrior, sitting right on his ascendant in the diplomatic but highly materialistic Pada 2, while his core identity operates through the communicative firepower of Pada 3.
The source material states that this chart configuration screams throne room. It provides a bold, unapologetically kingly presence and massive, ego-driven ambition. The combination of Magha and Mars in the 1st house makes the native incredibly combative. They are unapologetic in claiming power, viewing every interaction as a battle for dominance. It is the exact blueprint of how a real estate mogul transforms into a larger-than-life political king.
But the analysis doesn't stop at the aggression. It points to a deeper mechanical layer. Magha's ultimate planetary ruler is Ketu, the shadow planet of sudden loss, detachment, and the stripping of the ego. The text says that this underlying Ketu rulership is an engine that explains his dramatic, unprecedented fall and rise cycles. The bankruptcies in the 90s, the impeachments, the losses, the massive comebacks. It fuels what the source calls an unbreakable belief in his own destiny. The text literally states that his throne is built on sheer ancestral grit and guarded by audacity.
It is a textbook structural example of how Mars behaves when it feels inherently entitled to the Magha throne. Next, the source material provides the chart data for Bill Clinton,
America's 42nd president. His key placement is the sun. And the text reminds us that the sun is the literal soul of the astrological chart and the primary indicator for government and central authority. His sun is placed in the very first pada of Magha, sitting deep in its 12th house.
Pada 1 is the Aries and Mars-ruled division. It is the most aggressive, limit-pushing, charismatic, and physically passionate room in the Magha constellation. The text notes that having the Sun, the King, and the Star of Kings gave him immense natural charisma, significant policy victories, and the stamina for 2 terms in high office.
But here is where we see that absolute karmic guarantee of a downfall trigger with terrifying precision.
Yes, the shadow side emerges exactly on schedule. The text points out that the downfall struck precisely according to the mathematical timing of his chart. During his specific Jupiter-Sun dasha period in 1998, the trap was sprung.
Let me quickly explain a dasha period for anyone who isn't deep into Vedic astrology. Think of a dasha as a karmic time-release capsule. Your life is divided into specific chapters, and each chapter is ruled by a specific planet. So when his Jupiter-Sun dasha chapter began, the capsule containing the karma of his Magha Sun opened up. And what happened in 1998? He faced a massive, historic public scandal and impeachment.
And the source material explicitly links the nature of this downfall to his 12th house placement. In astrology, the 12th house governs hidden affairs, secrets, isolation, self-undoing, and specifically bed pleasures. The text calls this a flawless textbook case of a malefic in Magha downfall from high office, triggered exactly by the house significations. The music stopped, and the 12th house was the chair that was pulled away.
But it's crucial to note that Magha also offers profound resilience if the lesson is learned. The source points out that his post-presidency comeback is a classic Magha redemption arc. He endured the brutal, ego-stripping event of the impeachment and then pivoted to turn that ancestral karma into a legacy of global service and foundation work. He survived the customs check. Which brings us to the 4th political figure analyzed in the text, Rahul Gandhi.
His chart presents a deeply challenging configuration. He features Ketu, the shadow planet of ultimate force detachment, placed precisely at 12 degrees and 54 minutes in Magha Pada 4, located in his 8th house.
Pada 4. The Cancer and Moon-ruled division. The one intensely focused on family, homeland, local politics, and giving oneself away to the people.
And we are talking about a man who literally inherited a massive political throne, the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, one of the most powerful political families in the world.
But because Ketu, the force of spiritual void and letting go, is placed exactly in this ancestral nakshatra, and specifically in the volatile 8th house, the text says it creates an agonizing dynamic. It forces him to repeatedly painfully surrender that inherited throne. From being the dynastic prince to enduring political exiles, massive electoral defeats, and grueling comebacks, the text frames his entire life as Magha's deepest, most difficult lesson: true power must be released, not clutched. Ketu will constantly strip the crown from his head to enforce detachment from the family legacy. So, when we pull back and look at the big picture, what does this all mean? When you look at these 4 distinctly different leaders, Obama, Trump, Clinton, Gandhi, do you see what I see? It's the exact same underlying ancestral script playing out, just wearing different political masks and operating through different planetary actors. Rahu creates this massive, inescapable, obsessive pull toward the throne. Ketu forces a repeated, humiliating public surrender of it. Yeah. And when the Sun or Mars is involved, it is all about violently holding that power until the specific house placement triggers the inevitable, unavoidable customs check.
That is the precise pattern the source material illuminates. The individual planets and houses dictate the specific method and the flavor of the rise and the fall, but Magha itself dictates the absolute certainty of it. The karmic script of legacy, peak power, forced detachment, and eventual redemption is mathematically undeniable in these readings.
But this dynamic isn't just limited to the ballot box. Politicians are, in a way, just temporary elected kings. The source material takes us beyond politics to show how this exact same blueprint dictates the lives of literal bloodline royalty, icons of cinema, and even massive figures of spiritual leadership. Let's look at how the universe treats the people who don't have to campaign for the throne.
The text begins this next section by examining the chart of King Charles III. His chart features Saturn powerfully placed in Magha.
Saturn, the planet of the Great Delay, the harsh taskmaster, the planet that is fundamentally anti-authoritarian, governs the working class, and demands exhausting, unglamorous hard work.
Exactly. And we must ask, what does Saturn do when it is placed directly in the star of instant, divinely ordained royal power? It delays it. It freezes it. The text points out that this specific placement brought Charles a destined authority, but it was paired with an incredibly heavy, restrictive karmic duty to his lineage. He became the longest-serving heir apparent in British history.
He had to wait decades. He was a senior citizen before he was finally allowed to sit on the throne he was born to inherit.
Because Saturn, acting as the karmic taskmaster inside the Magha throne room, completely denied him the instant gratification of the crown. It forced him to earn the ancestral respect through grueling time, frustrating duty, and decades of quiet, often mocked service. The text specifically notes his early, heavily criticized focus on environmentalism, rather than just inheriting the spotlight instantly. The profound lesson for his chart, according to the source, is that real sovereignty for him was defined by his endurance and service to the lineage, not the wearing of the crown itself.
And then the text immediately contrasts his slow Saturnian burn with the explosive chart of Princess Diana. Her core placement is Mars and Rahu conjunct, sitting right next to each other in Maghapada 3, located in her 10th house of career, reputation, and public standing.
Mars and Rahu conjunct is highly explosive, erratic, and deeply passionate energy. When you place that combination in the 10th house, directly in the star of royalty, the text calls it the ultimate manifestation of the throne in the public eye.
She completely shattered royal protocol. She used that massive amplifying Rahu platform to forge what the text calls humanitarian crowns. She bypassed the cold Saturnian tradition of the palace and went directly to the people. The text calls her a global queen of hearts, but the Magha requirement for detachment came for her tragically early.
The text explains the mechanics of her tragedy through this lens. She had to experience a brutal, highly public detachment from the literal physical palace, the divorce, the stripping of her HRH title, in order to fully claim her eternal, unshakable throne in the public heart. Her story is framed as Magha's purest, most poignant teaching. You must rule with genuine compassion, or the rigid structures of the throne will completely consume you.
The next chart mentioned in our sources is honestly perhaps the most fascinating psychological study of this entire deep dive. We are looking at Emperor Hirohito of Japan.
A profoundly complex example. According to the astrological data provided, Hirohito had his fifth lord, the specific planet that governs power, intelligence, and a royal seat, which in his case was Mars, placed in the 9th house of Dharma, religion, and fatherhood, sitting directly in Magha Nakshatra.
So he is handed the ultimate position. He is given absolute power and control of the land by birthright into a fiercely traditional royal family. In the culture of his time, he held a literal god-emperor status.
Yes. The fifth lord, placed in the 9th house within the royal star of the ancestors, created what the text accurately calls an inescapable throne of duty. He was entirely trapped by his dharma. However, the text reveals a stunning, almost heartbreaking contradiction buried deep in his chart. In Vedic astrology, there is a concept called the Atmakaraka. It is the planet that holds the highest degree in your chart, and it represents the true, deepest desire of your soul for this lifetime. Hirohito's Atmakaraka was Mercury, and it was placed in the deeply sensitive, watery sign of Pisces.
And what does the text say that specific Mercury and Pisces placement meant for the god-emperor of Japan?
It reveals that his true, internal, authentic soul desire was to work quietly in the field of marine biology. Specifically, the text notes he wanted to study and write poems about jelly shells. He possessed a deeply artistic, gentle, highly research-oriented nature. On a personal soul level, he had absolutely zero interest in serving as a ruler, let alone the commander of a global war.
Wait, jelly shells, as in literal microscopic marine biology. That is incredible. Think about the psychological horror of that. It is like being forcefully drafted to command a brutal, world-altering war when your only life's dream, your soul's one true, quiet desire, was to be a marine biologist studying jellyfish in a lab.
Precisely. It is a staggering disconnect. But as the text firmly states, when you are bound by the karma of Magha, you do not have a choice. Personal desire is irrelevant. It is a duty you are compelled to fulfill to complete the ancestral mandate.
The universe essentially seized his luggage at the border and handed him a rifle and a crown. Which brings up one of the most major philosophical concepts the text introduces here, the idea of Magha acting as the gateway.
This is a crucial foundational concept in the Karam Vipak Samhita. The zodiac is a journey. The text explains that a soul must master the specific energy of each nakshatra in sequence, starting from Magha and traveling all the way to Jyeshta, to finally attain the ultimate comforts of life, what the texts call the comforts of Indra. Magha is the very first step of this second half of the journey. It is the gateway, the entry door.
And the source uses this incredibly vivid metaphor to explain it. It says that as you are attempting to cross this border into the realm of true power, the universe acts exactly like a ruthless customs patrol officer. They stop you, they open your bags, they aggressively search through your psyche, and they confiscate all the violated goods, the selfish desires, the petty grievances, and they separate you from all your unwanted baggage. Because Magha is fundamentally ruled by Ketu, the planet of loss, its ultimate job is to force you to travel lighter.
It is a profound shift in consciousness. Before a soul reaches Magha, in the first 9 nakshatras of the zodiac, the soul is primarily focused on its inner core, its basic survival, and its own personal happiness. But to cross the Magha gateway and become a true king, a true leader, you are forced to stop thinking about yourself. You must subjugate your ego to the collective well-being.
So for Hirohito, he was forced to leave his personal, gentle, artistic desires for jelly shells at the customs border. He had to detach from his own soul's wants and endure the crushing weight of his empire's dharma.
Exactly. It is the ultimate manifestation of forced detachment.
Moving from literal emperors to the royalty of modern culture, we also have the chart of Amitabh Bachchan, the eternal Shahenshah, or emperor of Indian cinema.
The text notes he has Rahu placed in Magha 3.
Pada 3 again. The Gemini and Mercury ruled division of communication, speech, and acting. That specific Rahu placement is the engine that made him one of the most dominant, legendary cinematic kings in history.
But as we have seen, the downfall pattern is a guarantee, and it struck him with brutal force. The text details that in the late 1990s, at the height of his legacy, he suffered a spectacular, humiliating downfall, a complete career collapse, the massive bankruptcy of his production company ABCL, and crushing, insurmountable financial debts.
The text describes this period as pure Ketu in Magha. The proud, untouchable king was violently stripped of his crown, his wealth, and his glory. But then, true to the Magha redemption arc, he makes a stunning, phoenix-like return. He pivots. He accepts his new reality, humbles himself, and takes a job hosting the television show Kaun Banega Karepate. He steps gracefully into a dignified, elder statesman role. The source says this is the pure resolution of regal karma. The throne ultimately belongs to those who are willing to entertain and serve the masses with dignity without the arrogance of their past.
Finally, we must look at the ultimate expression of the spiritual throne. The text provides the chart for Paramahansa Yogananda, widely considered the father of yoga in the West.
His chart is incredibly focused. It shows both the moon, which represents the mind and emotions, and the ascendant, representing the physical self and life path, enthroned directly in Magha.
And here we see that hidden timing secret we discussed earlier validate itself perfectly in reality. The text points out that at the exact Magha karmic activation age of 21, he experienced his massive life shift. He earned his BA degree, which the text notes was a vital mark of ancestral honor in his family, and simultaneously, he took his formal monastic vows.
Boom. The alarm clock goes off at exactly 21, and he steps directly into his destiny, initiating into Kriya Yoga. But instead of seizing a material throne, a corporation, or a political office, he chose a spiritual one. The text notes that Magha's heavy Petri energy is what allowed him to so deeply honor his guru lineage, while the Kamtu influence allowed him to detach from the massive fame he acquired. He mastered the inner kingdom rather than the outer one.
So we have examined politicians, literal bloodline kings, cinema royalty, and profound spiritual leaders. Across all these diverse lives, the underlying astrological architecture is identical. The ambitious rise, the brutal ego check by the customs patrol, the required detachment, and finally the establishment of the legacy.
With all of these massive historical precedents established, it begs the ultimate question. What happens when this specific cosmic weather pattern returns to the current day? Because according to the calculations in our sources, we are about to hit a major global activation of this exact energy. Let's look at the transits of 2026 and 2027.
The Karam Vipak Samhita research provides highly specific, mathematically calculated transit predictions for the upcoming years, centering around 2 major slow-moving planetary movements through the constellation of Magha. The first major event is Ketu transiting through Magha from March to December of 2026.
Let's explain transits for a second.
Right.
We aren't talking about where the planets were when you were born anymore. We're talking about where the actual planets in the sky are moving right now. It is the cosmic weather forecast. And Ketu, the planet of severe detachment, the actual lord of Magha itself, is coming home to clear out the throne room.
Yes. For anyone alive with strong Magha placements in their birth chart or even just operating on the global political stage, this represents the ultimate throne surrender or reclaim moment. The text characterizes this 9-month period as an era of intense revelations, potential health crises, massive public image tests, and most importantly, the aggressive stripping away of the ego on a global scale.
The Customs Border Patrol is stepping up their inspections, and they're bringing dogs. Let's look at what the text specifically predicts for the figures we discussed who are still living during this upcoming transit. For Barack Obama, Ketu will transit directly over his natal Rahu star. The text says this intensely activates his 8th house hidden power axis. We should expect massive karmic revelations regarding his legacy, or surges of intense, behind-the-scenes influence to come to light.
For Donald Trump, Ketu will transit directly over his natal Lagna star, his core ascendant. The text warns of severe, ego-driven identity tests. It frames this as a critical, unavoidable moment of either absolute surrender or forceful reclaim. However, the astrological math notes that Mars joins this alignment in November 2026, which could fuel an incredibly dramatic, aggressive comeback or a volatile reassertion of his power right at the end of the transit.
For King Charles, Ketu hits his natal Saturn. The text says this intensely magnifies his karmic duty to his lineage, likely bringing severe health challenges or massive tests to his public image and the stability of the crown itself.
For Bill Clinton, Ketu transits his natal sun star, potentially surfacing deep, past-life 12th house karma, which translates to sudden health crises or the revelation of long-buried privacy scandals. For Amitabh Bachchan, hitting his natal Rahu star might trigger another painful stripping of the crown moment concerning his career legacy, or serve as a severe health caution.
And for Rahul Gandhi, the text points out he will experience an exact Ketu return Ketu in the sky, returning exactly to where it was when he was born, right on his natal Ketu in Magha. The text states that deep revelations, party scandals, or the final forced surrender of his political power are highly likely. It also warns of health risks to his immediate family, specifically mentioning his mother, Sonia Gandhi. However, it notes this brutal period could ultimately lead to renewed public respect if he embraces philosophical wisdom and steps away gracefully.
But the Ketu transit is only half of the story of 2026, because right as Ketu finishes its destructive clearing out in October 2026, Jupiter enters Magha.
The wise counselor arrives to rebuild the room.
Exactly. While Ketu's job is to ruthlessly strip away what is corrupt, rotting, or unnecessary, Jupiter's entry brings immense grace. The text uses beautiful terms here, like phoenix-like resurgence, philosophical redemption, and the grace of an elder statesman legacy. Jupiter provides the deep wisdom required to rule properly, but only after Ketu has successfully removed the toxic ego.
It is the ultimate cosmic 1-2 punch. The complete breakdown of the false self, followed immediately by the philosophical, grounded rebuild. The text says that for all of these living figures, Jupiter offers the final chance to fulfill their ultimate legacy without the heavy, blinding burden of their own ego. It is the invitation to finally become the elder statesman.
But to survive these intense transits, whether you are a world leader sitting in a literal palace or just an everyday person trying to navigate the power dynamics of your own life and family, the Karam Vipak Samhita provides highly specific spiritual guidance. It offers the direct advice of Lord Shiva himself, the remedies for Magha Nakshatra.
And this section is where the entire philosophy of the text really crystallized for me. Because if someone tells you that you are about to lose your power, your status, or your control, your immediate human instinct is to fight it. You clench your fists, you hold on tighter, you hire lawyers, you build walls. But the remedies explain that Lord Shiva's absolute guidance for surviving this gateway nakshatra is to do the exact opposite. Do not fight the loss of power.
No. Fighting Ketu only creates more suffering. The ultimate survival strategy, the true remedy, is absolute sincerity. It is actively honoring the Pitris, the ancestors, and willingly allowing Ketu to strip away what is violated, corrupt, or no longer needed.
So the ultimate survival strategy for the nakshatra of absolute royal kingship is, well, it's to voluntarily step down, to open your hands. That is the ultimate cosmic paradox. To keep your true power, your true legacy, you have to be completely willing to lose the material symbol of it.
It is the profound willingness to travel lighter. As the text so clearly emphasized with the tragic story of Hirohito, you have to master this detachment to ever earn the true comforts of the soul. The remedies listed in the text aren't magical spells designed to forcefully glue a crown onto your head. They are daily practices of humility. They involve honoring the ancestors through quiet ritual, maintaining rigorous self-discipline, feeding the poor, and peacefully opening your bags when you reach the customs check at the border.
It is incredibly profound. The mechanics are clear. Ketu clears the throne, and Jupiter brings the grace. If you honor the Pitras, if you perform the remedies of humility, and if you let go of your ego, you will not merely survive these upcoming transits, you will rise from them as a true, detached sovereign of your own life.
It completely reframes our modern understanding of what power actually is. True Magha energy isn't about the desperate, paranoid clutching of authority. It is the quiet, unshakable confidence of knowing you are part of a massive, ancient lineage and possessing the supreme grace to know exactly when your chapter is done.
Now, regarding those transits, the text explicitly links these overarching themes, the Ketu clearing and the Jupiter rebuilding, to a broader 12 Rashi Vedic analysis. How does this universal customs check affect the entire zodiac wheel during 2026 and 2027?
The source material focuses strictly on those overarching themes, applying them broadly to the 12 signs, or Rashis. Because Magha is the royal star, when Ketu transits through it, every single sign experiences a specific dismantling of ego related to their own karmic inheritance. For the fire signs, like Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, it is a direct confrontation with their personal authority and pride. They are forced to learn that true leadership cannot be sustained by sheer willpower alone.
Right, they have to surrender their need to always be the hero or the boss.
Yeah.
What about the earth signs? Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn.
For the earth signs, the customs check happens in the realm of material security and structure. Ketu Traverse and Magha demands that they detach from their obsession with accumulating physical wealth as a substitute for true ancestral legacy. They must realize that money cannot buy the throne of respect.
And the air signs? Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. They are so focused on intellect and social connection.
Their test involves communication and diplomacy. The Magha transit forces them to strip away superficial networking and face the deeper, heavier responsibilities of community. They must abandon the manipulative use of words and embrace the Rudanta, the honest, authoritative truth, even when it is unpopular.
Which leaves the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. They are already so sensitive. How does the heavy Magha transit hit them?
It challenges their emotional boundaries. Water signs must learn not to drown in the past traumas of their ancestors. Ketu in Magha forces them to sever the toxic emotional cords to their lineage, allowing them to retain only the wisdom, not the pain. And for all 12 signs, when Jupiter finally enters Magha in October 2026, the reward is the same. Once the ego is cleared, Jupiter bestows the grace to build a genuine, lasting legacy based on service rather than domination.
As we wrap up this massive deep dive into the blueprint of power, let's briefly trace the journey we've been on. We started by defining Magha as the invisible throne, the deeply conservative, authoritative energy tasked with the massive burden of bridging the past and the future. We looked at how it wields power through the silent condemnation of the corrupt, winning battles without fighting, exactly like our bouncer at the club.
We explored the complex architecture of the four padas, ranging from the aggressive Aries warrior to the highly emotional defensive Cancer homeland defender, and we uncovered the crucial karmic activation age of 21 when the ancestors finally hand over the heavy keys to the kingdom.
And we confronted the terrifying shadow side, the unstable chair, the cosmic IRS audit, the inevitable downfall guaranteed to strip the ego. We saw this math perfectly illustrated in the wildly different lives of Obama, Trump, Clinton, Gandhi, King Charles, Princess Diana, Hirohito, Bachchan, and Yogananda. We saw how Rahu violently pulls you to the throne and how Ketu forcefully evicts you from it. And finally, we looked ahead to the intense cosmic weather of 2026 and 2027, where Ketu and Jupiter will demand that all of us travel lighter and step into our own elder statesman wisdom.
Magha serves as a profound, uncompromising astrological lens. It shows us that true, lasting power lies not in clutching the arms of the throne until your knuckles bleed, but in leaving behind an enhanced, healed legacy and having the profound grace to step away peacefully when the karmic customs check inevitably arrives.
But I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought. A question extrapolated from the very darkest corners of this text. If Magha truly represents our ancestral legacy and that invisible karmic handover activates around age 21, well, what happens if the ancestors you are inheriting this from were deeply, irreparably corrupt? If the lineage itself is poisoned? When that alarm clock rings, Do you inherit their golden throne? Or do you just inherit the immense, crushing karmic debt of their inevitable downfall? How exactly do you travel light when the bags you were handed at birth are full of someone else's stones?
Ah, that is the ultimate terrifying challenge of the gateway.
Something to think deeply about the next time you look closely at the branches of your own family tree. Thank you for joining us on this massive exploration of the Karam Vipak Samhita. You are now armed with the hidden mechanical blueprints of history's kings. Until next time, stay curious and travel light.